Every gilded cage is built with walls of comfort. The only question is what you're paying for them.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden systems of influence that kind of shape our world. We're going to dive into what's called the control matrix, from the little psychological tricks used every day, all the way up to the very language of law and finance.
Okay, so let's jump right in with a really powerful idea. Control, it isn't always about force or about tearing you down. The thinking here is that it's much more subtle. It's about praise. When someone flatters you, makes you feel special, powerful, or like you're in on a secret, you're not just buying into their message. You're buying into a version of yourself that feels really, really good. That praise is the bait, and it makes you loyal to a flattering lie because, well, who wants to let go of feeling great? But, this idea of one-on-one manipulation really just scratches the surface. It makes you ask a much bigger question. What if these methods of control are actually built into the systems we live in? Things like our finances, the news we get, the laws we follow. Are there these massive matrices of influence just running in the background, kind of operating just beyond what we normally see?
So first up, let's explore the most intimate layer of this matrix, the mind game. This is all about the psychology of compliance, the subtle tactics that guide our behavior every single day, often without us even realizing it.
Think about the power of comfort as a tool for control. The goal isn't to lock you in a physical cage, right? It's to make the cage so darn comfortable you never even think about leaving. Comfort becomes the reward for just going along with things. That familiar job, the predictable routine, it all feels so safe. But what's suggested here is that this very comfort can be a kind of soft leash, teaching us to fear change more than we fear stagnation. Basically trading the huge possibility of freedom for the certainty of a predictable but much smaller life.
And here we see another huge tactic, the illusion of choice. You're asked, hey, do you want candidate A or candidate B? And it feels like you're in charge, like you're making a real decision. But what about candidate C? What about the option to just walk away entirely? That's never presented. Often, both choices lead to a pretty similar, predetermined outcome. It's compliance, but it's cleverly disguised as freedom. It's a trick that keeps us from rebelling because, hey, we feel like we were the ones in control.
Okay, so let's scale up from our own psychology and see how these ideas get built into these huge, vast systems. We're now entering the financial and legal matrix, a world where, according to some really interesting researchers, words themselves are basically used as weapons.
This brings us to a really fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty controversial perspective from the researcher Jordan Maxwell. He argues that modern banking law isn't based on the law of the land, like you'd think. Instead, it's based on something called the law of the water, or, to be technical, international maritime admiralty law. The theory goes all the way back to ancient Phoenician merchant bankers and suggests that currency flows like water, and the banks are the ones who control that flow.
And according to Maxwell's view, this leads to the absolutely critical distinction you see right here. He argues that within this system, you never truly pay a bill. Why? Because modern currency is basically just a note of debt from a central bank. So you can only discharge a debt by transferring that note, that liability, to someone else. It's a word game for sure, but it's a word game with massive implications for who truly owns what in our financial world.
Now, this whole theory has a very practical and kind of spooky application. According to Maxwell's research, the legal system basically sees two versions of you. There's the flesh and blood person, John Smith, but when your name shows up in all capital letters, on a bill, a driver's license, a court summons, that, he says, signifies a legal fiction, a corporate you. And it's this corporate you, he argues, that's subject to this international banking law, effectively turning your interactions with the government and banks into commercial contracts. So if you can control the legal and financial rules of the game, what's the next logical step? Well, you've got to control the story that everyone believes. And that brings us to Section 3, manufacturing the narrative, and this idea of engineering consent.
And the evolution of this idea is, well, it's pretty chilling when you lay it out. It really kicks off in 1928 with Edward Bernays, who's basically the father of public relations. He openly wrote about the need for an invisible government to engineer the consent of the masses. Then, this idea allegedly moved from just a theory into practice, with things like the CIA's rumored Operation Mockingbird. And you see a really clear example in 1964 with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where manipulated information was used to get public support to escalate a war.
And that brings us right up to the present day. We're talking about the most sophisticated, most automated layer of control anyone's ever seen, the algorithmic leash.
The key idea here is something called surveillance capitalism, a term from the scholar Shoshana Zuboff. It's a whole new kind of economic model, where the raw material isn't oil or steel, it's us. It's our private human experiences, our clicks, our likes, our conversations, our location data. Literally all of it is claimed as free raw material for this new industry. So how does this whole digital assembly line actually work? It's simple, really. Step 1, tech platforms just take your experience as data. Step 2, they feed all of that data into massive AI systems to create these incredibly accurate predictions about what you're going to do or buy or think next. And then, step 3, they sell those predictions. The customers here aren't you. They're advertisers, political campaigns, basically anyone who wants to influence your behavior with a high degree of certainty.
And get this, the internet itself is changing. About half of all web traffic right now is generated by bots, not people. So just think about that for a second. When you see a trend or a popular opinion blowing up online, are you actually seeing a real human consensus, or are you seeing a manufactured one?
Okay, so after laying out this whole complex matrix of control, it's really easy to feel a little helpless, right? So the obvious question is, what can we do? Well, that's what our final section is all about, reclaiming your sovereignty. So what can we do on a bigger, systemic level? Well, the sources point to a bunch of different strategies. We've got to demand transparency in how algorithms work. We have to push for data protection laws that give us actual control. We need to invest in media literacy so we can all spot manipulation better. And maybe most importantly, we have to support technologies and platforms that are actually built to serve us, not just exploit us.
But beyond all the technology and the policy fixes, the sources we looked at suggest that true sovereignty, real freedom, it starts inside. It's an internal act. Philosophies like Stoicism teach us to focus only on what we can control, our own thoughts, our own responses, and to just let go of the external pressures. Existentialism calls on us to live authentically, to create our own values instead of just accepting the ones that society hands to us.
And that really brings us to our final slide, and the question I want to leave you with. In a world with so many systems, psychological, financial, algorithmic, all designed to guide your behavior and shape what you want, what does it truly mean to make an authentic choice? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.